The attempted assassination of former President Donald Trump was unprecedented and one for the history books. How could that have happened? Today, on Bets and Badges, we're going to take a closer look at the facts that are known, but we're going to take a step back and go beyond the news media to discuss with law enforcement professional executives. We want to take a look and get their perspective of what happened, what are the known facts, and how do we prevent such an incident from occurring. We're also going to take a look at what could be described as nothing less than a security meltdown at Copa America, specifically this past weekend at Hard Rock Stadium. I am Robert Asensio, and with me is my co-host, retired police chief, former and military historian, David Magnuson. How are you, Chief?
Doing great. How about yourself, Robert?
Oh, man, I'm doing great. But why don't you introduce your former colleagues and these top-level national law enforcement executives?
Well, it is a high honor to talk about these two gentlemen, and I work with both of them for decades. So you have first former police chief, Miami Police Chief George Colina, and you have current police chief, Miami Police Chief Manny Morales. Two great guys with a wealth of knowledge, call them friends, and never get in the way of giving their opinion, a good, honest assessment of things. That's how I've got to know them throughout these years. So I suspect nothing differently today.
Yeah, top American heroes.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Welcome, gentlemen.
Thank you.
So let's get into it, right? What do we know? We know that 6 minutes into former President Trump's rally in Butler, Pennsylvania, man, I get chills just talking about it. A sniper, a subject, took shots at him. I counted from the video about 8 shots, followed by 2 shots. One of which you see the president on TV. And by now, most people across the globe have seen the horrific scene of the president when he recognizes he's hit. His ear was struck. He goes down. Secret Service jumps on top of him. Snipers, counter sniper team, Secret Service counter sniper team takes the subject out immediately. Then you take the president out. Security team, heroic acts. They take the president out of this area, the danger zone, after they admit that the subject or confirm that the subject is down. But now the post-analysis, the post-incident questions come up, left to the FBI to answer because they're the investigators in this case now. How could this have happened? Gentlemen, what were your thoughts when this occurred? First, let's start out with Chief Morales.
So, gentlemen, I think that I felt just about like everybody else did across the nation, perhaps the globe. How can this happen, man? And we have certainly had our share of dignitary protection details. Miami is a very popular destination for just about any candidate or sitting president. So we're well aware of the intense planning that goes into it, the meticulous execution of it, and you can't only assume that something didn't go according to plan, right? That something there didn't work out. And from the limited information that we have and looking at the news reports and what has been released by the federal agencies, right? There was multiple opportunities to perhaps have prevented or take some sort of, preventive action when the incident took place. And listen, I think that now the blame game starts. And certainly, as you stated before, everybody's gonna say we learned from this incident and it won't happen again. But I think that's too little, too late.
What are your thoughts?
We learned from the incident, but at this point in law enforcement, with the professionals, whether it's local police or Secret Service, we learned from it. We should have learned from it. We should have been ready. We should have been on the go. That these sort of things should not have happened. I mean, listen, if you're in a situation there where we're in Pennsylvania, you already have an elevated position outside, 100 yards, 200 yards tops, outside the periphery of the responsibility of the Secret Service. Should that not have been extended to include that building? I mean, it's just there's a number of things here. And yes, you can Monday morning quarterback, but in football, that's what you do. You go in and you review the films immediately after and see where you messed up.
Yeah.
And for anybody to say at this point that somebody did not mess up, I mean, you got the ostrich syndrome. You put your head in the sand. It should not have happened.
Yeah.
And by the grace of God, and I say this very loosely, by the grace of God, our former president wasn't assassinated.
Yeah.
But by the same token, we had a firefighter, a family man that was killed. So when you say the grace of God, I have a little bit of an issue with that, in the sense that somebody went there with their family to enjoy something, to enjoy democracy, and got killed.
Yeah, exercise their constitutional right, right? To exercise their political freedom of speech, right? Or freedom of speech when it comes to political opinions. But let's turn it around. I'm sorry, hold your thought real quick. Let's turn it over to retired police chief George Colina, who has been doing the circuit, speaking to media about his thoughts of how to prevent this, how it occurred, what occurred. But I wanted to point out before we turn it over to you, Chief, that you are right, David. A firefighter, a father who was there in the audience, Corey Campanelli, Compitone was killed. He's 50 years old. He was there shielding his family. Also, 57-year-old David Dutch and 70-year-old James Copenhaver were shot. Chief, please add to the conversation. Let's talk about this. Let's open it up.
Yeah, obviously incredibly tragic. Somebody goes out to enjoy a rally, and it's not what you would think would happen, that you would be in danger, right? If you're going somewhere where there's this incredible amount of security, where it literally takes hours to even gain access to the open grounds, you'd think it's not possible. Just for the general public, right, that's listening in, and so they can have an idea of how this typically works. The Secret Service will go out way ahead of time, right, to the site, wherever it may be, and they do what's called an advance, along with local law enforcement. And they're measuring, you know, where do we bring the president in through? Where do we leave? Where's the nearest hospital? If something were to happen, how do we get there? How do we get out? What are points of vulnerability, right? So they examine this. Where do we think that we need to make sure we shore up further? Where should we have a secondary perimeter? These are all things that are pre-planned. So it's not like you get there and you're kind of surprised by these buildings, an elevated position, limited access in and out. There is no surprise there. They know exactly what's out there. I can tell you what everyone else has thought. You know, how do you not have someone on that roof? We don't know until there's an investigation. What was the thinking? Why wasn't someone put there? Normally, you clear an area, again, for the general public. I know you guys know this. You clear an area, and then you put law enforcement there. You sanitize it, and you keep it sanitized by posting law enforcement.
You know what was interesting, Chief? Let me interrupt you, because I want to go back to what you were about to say. The Secret Service director, right, the current director, Kimberly Cheadle, said, statement's been released by her stating that the reason why that particular building where the shooter was perched or took the shot from was because it was elevated, and that it would have been a danger to law enforcement personnel.
Angle roof,
yeah. But the interesting piece is that when you look at where the counter sniper team was located, they were also on an angled roof. They were on the top of the angled roof. So you were going to say, Dave, that I interrupted you.
Well, no, I was going to say that what you hear is, and we've had this speculation with the guy on top of the roof, the offender. If he would have gone the bump stock route, how many people could have been taken out? I mean, he had the shot. He was in position. Once you're in position, it's almost ball game over. You're waiting to see what's going to take place. But I've heard too many people say, we were very lucky. And I'll say this: luck is not a strategy, and luck is not sustainable. And if you're basing how you go about things based on luck, I can tell you, it's not going to end well.
So let's go back to what Chief Colina was saying, and Chief Morales, join us here, because you are running one of the largest police departments in the country right now. You know, Chief Colina explains about the pre-event scouting of the scene, right? The pre-event planning. Then you go into the deployment. The operational plan is created. The request for resources. How do you, as a police executive of a major police agency now, dealing in today's environment of a divided country, very, very volatile scenarios, how do you plan and ensure that something like this doesn't occur again in your jurisdiction?
So, I mean, Chief Colina was right, man. This is a very meticulous process, and a lot of assumptions are being made. But listen, I know we're all human beings. We're imperfect creatures. And sometimes complacency sets in, right? You do 200 rallies, nothing goes wrong, and you're kind of on autopilot. And in reality, there's certain tasks, there's certain missions that are so critical that you have to use that ultimate care every single time, paying extreme attention to detail. So we'll see, man. Some of the things that I find kind of troublesome will be like that duties and responsibilities are clearly delineated before you get there, right? What's the Secret Service going to do? What are the state agencies going to do? What are the local cops going to do? And some of the things that I found curious and some of the video that I've seen so far is those witnesses alerting the local cops and the news reports that are coming out about the location of certain cops and tactical teams, man. That's what really surprises me, right? That nobody kind of said, hey, whoa. It doesn't matter what this is, whether it could be a press guy with a long range camera, whatever it might be. This is something out of the norm that we don't usually see here, and something that was gonna, trigger somebody's immediate alarm, and that didn't happen. So for me, that was a big surprise.
Yeah, Chief Colina, you do training, right? You're now on the national scene doing consulting with all the law enforcement agencies across the country. Let me ask you, mindset, right? So it's reported that the subject was climbed a structure where apparently there was law enforcement in the building or nearby, and that at one point the subject, before taking the shots, is confronted by a law enforcement personnel, an officer, who, as it came out in parts of the news, and this little piece is coming out, so there's more details to unfold, but one of the reports is that the officer, when the subject turns towards the officer, points the AR-15 at him, the officer falls. Let's talk about the preparedness and the readiness of officers, with what headspace they have to be in when they confront a subject like that. And was it a green light to take that subject out at that point? Because we know it was not law enforcement.
I think, it depends where you're at, right? So is there a green light? Absolutely. Somebody's armed, right, with a long gun. In fairness, I don't know the level of experience of those local officers. And I don't mean to sound critical of them. I truly don't know their level of experience. In Miami, the officers in Miami, even the ones that have a year and a half, 2 years on, they've experienced quite a bit already, right? They have a much greater sense of awareness of danger. They're in a urban area where there's always a lot at play, and there's a constant training, and there's a lot of experience there. So even the young officers have other people to rely on that are very experienced. I don't know what those officers typically come across. I don't know what their training is. In Miami, Chief Morales, before he was the chief of police, he was the chief of our field operations. We had big events. He would turn in plans to me that were very precise. This is who we have. This is where. This is the people I'm bringing in. This is the time. This is who's handling this at these different areas. This is the level of expertise here. And we would discuss it at length, and, very confident in the people that are carrying out their missions. I don't know. I know Pennsylvania State Police was there. I suspect they have a little bit more experience. But I don't know the officers of that local jurisdiction, right? What do they normally do day to day? Was this, quite frankly, more than they're used to, trained for? And I don't know if they played in their head, if something were to happen, how do I react? Because in Miami, forget Miami, in South Florida, right? All the agencies here, you know, this is a big area, and you constantly play that game in your head to help you survive. And I don't know that that happened there. And it makes me wonder, right? Like Chief Morales was saying, I'm curious about that, because I don't know what they typically experience there, but it should have been considered. If you're in an area that's somewhat rural, that they typically don't handle this kind of event, I think that should have been considered in the planning. If it wasn't, we don't know that.
We have an added caveat here. We now know that the Secret Service had elevated the protections based on threats coming out of Iran that were kept, you know, low key. They came out now. So that was with an elevated sort of mindset. But I want to add something here as well. And it's getting into a touch of historical context here. But when we say you learn from mistakes, I want to remind people of something. And there's about 10 different shootings, whether it's at presidents missing or hitting, or people running, or including MLK, et cetera, or Robert Kennedy. But people lose sight of one instance that I think brings it home about preparedness and learning, or not for that matter. You had Gerald Ford in 75, where Squeaky Fromm, one of the Manson clan, goes up, pulls the gun, clicks. She never racked the one, and she was right there, never racked one in the chamber. All she kept saying is, why didn't it go off? Why didn't it go off? So, okay, you learn from that, right? But 3 weeks later, also with President Ford, you have Sarah Jane Moore standing right next to her with a fully loaded gun. And there was a guy in a wheelchair, a veteran, sitting there. When he saw the gun come up, he slaps her hand, gun goes up in the air, she's taken into custody. So in that 3-week period, what was learned? Because to me, I would tell you, not much. So how long does it take for you to learn things after something happens, when there's a tragedy, and is a tragedy? Just because the person missed doesn't make it, or didn't strike what he wanted to do, except for the innocent victims in the crowd, doesn't make it any less serious. It's just that he wasn't successful in it. But I go back to 75. When we say, okay, we're going to shore up things and make it better, and this is not going to happen again, sometimes that takes a little bit of time, because in that 75, in that 3-week period, obviously nothing was learned. And people lose sight of that.
And David, that's close cover security, right, for the president that clearly didn't adjust. Secret Service personnel. I know it's unrelated, but when you look at like Columbine, right, that was a big eye opener for a lot of people, and police in general adjusted, maybe not as well as they should have, but immediately there was an adjustment in training, an adjustment in how you deploy resources, your expectation of what they're going to do, et cetera.
But George, then you have the Uvalde effect.
Correct.
Years later, where you're trained and it doesn't work out. And some would say what happened at Parkland as well, despite the training.
Yeah, and I think that's a leadership thing, honestly. I think that was a leadership failure there, of someone not giving the commands that they, should have been giving. I don't know. It's something we haven't talked about. Someone is also in charge of supervising, right? It isn't just what officer is supposed to be at that building, and why wasn't there an officer? Somebody there in that little area, there should have been a supervisor who's also making sure that somebody didn't go take a break without asking for relief, go to the bathroom. Those things happen where people, you're going to go to the bathroom, you got to take a break. You got to say, hey, I need relief. We don't know those things. I hope we find those things out later in the investigation. I think they're important factors, but I think ultimately there's probably failures at multiple levels here. And when that happens, man, you really leave yourself open for something as terrible as this to occur.
So let me ask you this question. George, you bring up 2 great points. And I want to go back to the active shooter, because the National Threat Assessment Center was created founded after the Columbine incident. But you guys, both of you as police executives, man, what would you want to come out of this investigative report, this post-incident anatomy, if you will?
For me, I honestly prefer just bluntness. I don't think you need to be ugly about it, but I think sometimes we try to be overly sensitive to people's feelings, right, and not sound like you're Monday morning quarterbacking. Nobody really likes that. But I think it's so necessary. And so I personally would like it to be blunt, and not where you have to kind of read between the lines. Doesn't mean you have to be accusatory, but I think the failures need to be highlighted because it should become something that people then think in the future, you know, about, hey, remember, and hey, remember, let's make sure we don't blah, blah, blah.
Manny, your thoughts?
So for me, I would just want some clarity, right? Just to understand what actually went wrong. But I think that at the end of the day, you're going to see there was some sort of human failure. So for me and for our folks, I hope it offers a renewed sense of sensitivity and importance, right? Knowing that what we do is critical, it's high liability, and that there needs to be an absolute sense of vigilance at every event, every call, every sense, right? Not to fall into that sense of redundancy that you're like, man, I've responded to hundreds of domestic violence calls. That's the time you're going to get hurt. That's the time something's going to happen, right? When you get there and you're like, oh, not again. So I just want it to be that, a refresher to kind of focus our energy and our efforts back into putting the attention on the level of detail it deserves.
You know what I find interesting here, and I think Chief Colina, you brought it up. You mentioned Columbine, and we talk about the active shooters. We just touched upon Parkland with the youth. Of the 10 or the 10 previous shootings at public figures, whether assassination or misses, this person here, Crooks, is the youngest of all of them. So you're talking about a 20-year-old who was hell-bent. We don't know them if there a political motivation, what his story was. Was he going to go active shooter? We don't know. Was it a one shot to take out the former president? We don't know that. Aside from Booth, he would be the only person that was not taken into custody to be able to be spoken to. And we do know what John Wilkes Booth's motivation was. So that's a give me. So there's a lot of things here we don't know. But what stands out is certainly the youth of the person. Now we know he had a voter's card, so maybe he had some civic responsibility when you say, I want to vote. Okay. And he registers to vote. That's nothing we should have. All our youth want to have that civic responsibility. But the youth and this mindset here to take such action, I think that hasn't been discussed enough. And it will be, I'm sure, moving down, it'll be psychoanalyzed and all, but that just jumped out at me.
Yeah, but let's touch on what Chief Colina brought up, because you're right. Columbine was a defining period in our history, in our nation's history. You had a school active shooter situation, the first one, a major catastrophic, and then since then there have been a number of other incidents, mass casualty incidents, both in schools and in the public. Is this one of those copycat type incidents that, yeah, the president, it just happened to be at a speech or a rally where the former president is speaking, stumping. But is this more about subjects wanting to make the mark, right? Their big mark by taking out many people? Because I counted 8 shots in the video. Before there were 2 shots. There were 8 shots, and then there was a lull. Then there were 2 shots, and I suspect those were the snipers, the counter team shooting back. But is that what we have here? Because we have youth, we have somebody who fits the Secret Service profile of a active shooter, a loner, a young man who is bullied, a gun enthusiast, we don't know yet the radicalism, how radical he was in his views and his thoughts, but we do know that the shots took out more than the intended subject or the intended target. Chief, what are your thoughts on that? Is this more than an isolated incident? Is this part of what we see now is becoming a norm in our society of mass casualty incidents?
I think on time and the investigation will tell, right? To what level does the rhetoric that we have, the divisiveness that we have, the willingness of everyone to throw all types of outlandish conspiracy theories out there and take them for fact. So I mean, I'm curious to see what the search of his phone and his home computer is going to reveal, and who he was associating himself with. And more importantly, I want to see if there were some red flags somewhere out there that this could have been prevented, right? Because we're all talking about, hey, man, once the guy is out there and he's already got the position, it should be game over, right? I mean, like Chief Colina said, once you get there and you establish that control and that access and that proximity, I mean, luck is not the strategy, like, as you mentioned. So I'm curious to see how that turns out and what kind of information is revealed.
Yeah, and I think that Chief Morales makes an important point about some of the outlandish things that are being said, that some of the conspiracy stuff that's being said, that we all have to be really careful with what we hear. Because, for example, one of the things that I heard that I found appalling was that the SAC, right, the current Secret Service SAC, had no experience and came from Pepsi, right? Her previous job was at Pepsi. Well, I find out later that that's not accurate. She did come from Pepsi, but she got that job because she spent 27 years in the Secret Service, was part of, Obama's protective detail, was a supervisor, was a SAC at a field office, worked her ways up the rank. And again, I'm not making excuses for her. I'm just saying that this is one of the things that I heard, for example, that I thought, well, that's outrageous. How could they have put that person in that position without any experience, only to find out later that that's not accurate? And I'm sure there's going to be a lot of things put out that aren't accurate, and we should be mindful of that. Wait for the report to come out. I'm sure it's going to be investigated very thoroughly. We're going to learn a lot more once that report does come out.
Yeah,
but you also have a very comprehensive 9/11 report, and to this day, and the Warren Commission, and to this day, you still have people that are going to say, "Oh, they're lying, they're covering up." So there's just some people that you don't let the facts get in the way of a good story, right. Unfortunately, and that's what happens. And then it gets punctuated by more and more of the the tribalism that's on social media. And it leads you down a very dark path, ultimately.
True. And to Chief Colina's point, Kimberly Cheatham, the director of the Secret Service department, was a 27-year veteran of the Secret Service, an agent charged. Specifically, she was in the Obama administration. She was the head of current President Biden's security team, and she left after 27 years to Secret Service to work for PepsiCo, ran their national security infrastructure, right? But then she was brought in by the current administration to run the Secret Service. How does this change, or does it change police training? And Chief Morales, you alluded to it, that you hope that this incident will be a reminder to all that we can't take security and mass personnel events lightly. But does this change the training and the scope of priorities of leadership and law enforcement? I'm asking for the purpose of the viewers. Please give them something of reassurance here.
Yeah, absolutely, man. It just brings that focus on the importance on the supervisors too, as Chief Colina mentioned, man. Not only the officers that saw something that was out of whack and received the information from the witnesses, but what about the supervisors? They should have been, in tune with what was happening, keeping a tabs on their personnel and making sure that they raised the proper alarm, man. And kind of taking you back to the point on what's happening and how do you handle it. I remember Chief Colina used to say, man, there will always be the wackadoodles, right? And you can't account for those guys. But nowadays, man, this just seems to be a lot more.
Is it a technical term?
That's an absolute technical term, man. Now there seems like there's a lot of those folks out running around. So it just kind of bring to the forefront to the cops. I know that they understand how important their mission is, but I think this just kind of brings that extra level. It kind of highlights it a little bit, bluntly right in front of their face, how important their job is, their actions, and how sometimes you're lulled into the sense of complacency when you see something that is so obviously out of place that you're thinking, there's no way that this guy's carrying a gun and a ladder at a presidential rally. So it just like the mind defines it. Like, of course not. This guy's not walking around with a grenade in public, those kinds of things. So for folks to kind of take a second, if it looks out of place, man, let's address it with the importance that it needs.
Let me follow up with this, Chief Morales. What's your thoughts on the scrutiny and sometimes constant scrutiny from the public, and maybe not so much in Miami per se, but across the nation in different pockets throughout the country, of their scrutiny of law enforcement? Does that affect it at all? What's your thoughts on that?
I mean, listen, we have always lived with scrutiny. Maybe This the last couple of years, man, it has been at an all-time high when you're looking at the criticism and the scrutiny that law enforcement's under, even though there's a greater level of transparency and communication than there's ever been, whether it be in person or through the social media outlets in regards to the departments sending out that information to the community. But that is what law enforcement is. It's an incredibly unforgiving profession, man. You can do something right 1,000 times. The one time things go wrong, everybody's going to jump up and say, you see, there it is. There it is. I knew those guys were no good. And the allegations start flying around. This is a conspiracy. This is a setup. It's an inside job. So, you know, we live with that constantly, man. And some of us have become numb to it, but it's a very real threat to our profession.
Yeah. Chief Polino, what are you seeing nationally with respect to this issue?
I think it's a great question, because unfortunately you have some people that do hesitate. They're afraid that they're going to be criticized, or you know, why did you challenge this person, right? You know, you may be worried to offend someone. In this specific circumstance, I can't imagine, like Chief Morales said, somebody's walking with a ladder who isn't dressed right in military or police gear, with what appears to be a gun. You know, nobody's going to be offended, right? If you take that person down, right? I don't mean shoot them, but I mean certainly get flat on the ground, let me see your hands, that kind of thing. If it turns out that it's a maintenance guy and he's offended, well, you know, that's okay. Like Chief Morales says, hey, we're going to catch some of that, but at least we can go to bed at night knowing we're doing the best we can to protect people. But I do think, speaking in general, I do think that does happen sometimes, that the officers are a little worried, just because of the incredible level of scrutiny, of wanting to be as careful as they can be to not offend someone. And sometimes that does interfere with doing a good job.
You know, what's interesting is, not to patronize the two of you, Chief Morales, we just lost Chief. You know, what's interesting is not to patronize you guys, but under each one of your commands, I've noticed that, you know, you guys are the hands-on police executives, right? And you work with them, so you know. And what I've seen is, I've seen officer morale higher than it's been in the past. So that tells me, as a former law enforcement professional, as a person who's been in the military, that tells me, as a taxpayer, that you guys, giving the importance to the troops, it goes a long way. It's leadership. Going to what you said earlier, leadership.
They also have a very good ability to convey a message, to do it respectfully.
Is that what it is?
And to have a sense of humor at times. They both have great sense of humor, but they get the point across. And I'm honored to work with both of them. I mean, coming up the ranks with both. Yeah, absolutely. And people listen to that. You know, they're not talking down to people, but they're explaining what's going to go on, what needs to get done, and the job gets done. But yeah, that's what it takes. That's leadership.
Yeah.
And not everybody has it. I'm sorry.
Oh, for sure. Right. Not everyone's meant to be a leader. Not everyone behind the badge is meant to be a police officer.
A lot of wannabes. Right? Yeah, a lot of wannabes.
True.
Yeah.
So, General, let's bring it closer to home, to South Florida, if you will. We had an unfortunate event played out over the media, over the TV screen. That was this past weekend at Copa America, the Hard Rock Stadium. Again, not to criticize, but to talk about facts. Chief Colina, you couldn't say it any better. Let's talk about the facts. Let's put the facts out. Let's reflect on this from your personal experience, both of your personal experiences, on handling these type of events where there are a lot of people, very high emotions, volatile. But what happened here?
You know, in my opinion, I think perhaps, right, experience maybe. I can tell you that, you know, after Mandalay Bay in Vegas, right, that horrific shooting, soon after that, we had Ultra in Miami, and I was a fairly new chief. And, you know, that worried me, right, that someone could do the same here. And Chief Morales was in charge of operations. I don't know if it was his idea or someone under his command, but you know, they came up with a pretty detailed map, right, of numbering the buildings. So someone maybe they're not familiar with the addresses when we use other agencies. Let's put a counter sniper team, all these different things, right, that we planned for, picturing the worst, right? Which is my point. Hey, let's think of the worst and start planning to how do we mitigate the worst and then work that down. I don't know if that happened here. And in fairness to everyone over there at the county, they've had 1 million matches there at the stadium. Nothing's ever gone wrong. But I think perhaps here they didn't realize, hey, this is Colombia and Argentina. People are traveling from all over the country and South America to watch this, even those that don't have tickets. There's a rabid fanatics that come to these matches. This isn't Peru versus Canada, right? It's different. And I don't think that was really absorbed of, hey, let's plan like if something would go horribly wrong, what can we do? And again, I understand because things have always gone so well. Like Mo mentioned, Chief Morales had mentioned earlier about that complacency. Hey, we got a plan. It always seems to go well. I don't know that they considered that, number one. And then number two, there was certainly no audibles called, right? You see a lot of people there very early. Well, listen, maybe we open up the gates earlier, right? To avoid having that compression of people. And, there was a failure there. I think it's okay to say that. It's not to blame any one individual. It needs to be addressed because it was embarrassing.
You need to know your audience, I think, first and foremost.
Yeah.
You need to know your audience. This isn't a baseball game, because somebody made mention to me in discussions earlier in the week, well, it doesn't get like that with USA playing Cuba in baseball. Different crowd. Yeah, you'll have some people coming out protesting, and rightfully so, for the politics at play, perhaps. Different crowd. If you've got to know your audience, and I heard there were rabid fans, also a ton of hooligans. I mean, you look at what's going on the other side in the Europe Cup with Spain and England, and fistfights going on. And you have it here too in the cup here in the Copa, right? Yeah. You got to know your audience. I mean, it's almost borders on something Sun Tzu said. I'm not going to get into it, but you got to know it. You got to know what's coming here, and what the possibilities are. Yeah. It's almost like the perimeter in policing. Set it big, and you can shrink it as need be if you don't need it that, but you can't do it the other way around. And what happened is once it went off the deep end, too much, too little, too late.
And Chief Molina, in the city of Miami right now, you have, what is it, where the Marlins play, the stadium? You have where the Heat play. Do you have any other major venues in your city? I mean, you have what is it, on Key Biscayne, or I'm sorry, on the Biscayne, Rickenbacker Causeway? Man, you have a lot on your areas that many events like this take place, but there's a difference. And what are your thoughts on what happened and how we can prevent it?
Yeah, I think you approach every event a little bit different, right? I mean, the ultimate goal is to keep everybody safe and have a successful event. But you got to know your venue. You got to know your crowd. You got to know, the things that are outside of what the written reports are giving you, right? So when we're looking at whether it be Ultra at Bayfront Park, any type of concert, Marine Stadium, or a baseball game at the Marlins or the Casaya with the Miami Heat, you always got to be aware. And we do sometimes have a tendency to have this cookie cutter plans, man. And it's kind of unfortunate that for our partners over in Miami-Dade police, man, it just went so horrific, man. And I think just what aggravates it now is everybody's finger pointing, man. So everybody's trying to place the blame somewhere else instead of just kind of saying, hey, listen, it happened. It is what it is. We're going to move forward and kind of figure it out. Even though certainly looking back and Monday morning quarterback, because that's how you learning those tough lessons, you're going to see that there are some warning signs. And when you're looking at the Colombia-Uruguay game in Charlotte, you had some issues with those fans, right? So as they were coming in here, maybe preparing for something. But listen, nobody's immune. We had our own issues when Ultra first got started. We didn't have one of those fences, the no scaling and no climbing fences. And what happened is we had a large crowd over one side of the event and kind of gate access, and people were hurt, and we learned from that mistake, and we've implemented measures that prevent those things from happening, right? Which is the most important part.
I mean, the implementing of measures is certainly paramount. You're going back to 79. Now, to a lesser scale, it happened with general admission at rock concerts. You had Cincinnati, the Who concert, They stormed the gate for general admission. 6, 7 kids were smothered to death. I mean, 6 or 7 kids killed, teenagers. That was the end of it for major concert venues. It was now seating. You know, you had to get the seats and do it that way. And that was a radical departure from previous times. And perhaps there'll be a departure now. I mean, now you know what you know. And unfortunately, sometimes you don't know what you don't know unless you should have known.
Yeah, yeah, it's very well said. Gentlemen, we have about 5 minutes left. I wanted to get your personal closing thoughts, but my editorial for the audience is this. You know, for those that would criticize law enforcement, I will tell you, you should walk in the shoes of officers. Everything you see on the media is not necessarily how it's played out. It doesn't provide best context. You should speak to your law enforcement professionals, get to know them. But more importantly, you should support those law enforcement professionals who will run your agencies and ensure your community safety to the utmost. We must demand from our law enforcement, as well as all our first responders and all people who work for us via our tax dollars. We should demand the most that they can provide, the most professionalism, service that they can provide. Gentlemen, I want to hear your closing thoughts, because let's face it, sadly, as our history has shown, these incidents, mass casualty incidents, or such high-profile incidents, are generally followed by others. We know that we will have more incidents or more events in the state of in our communities locally, but also across the country. What is your advice, and what are your words to those that will watch this video? Chief Molina.
I think that, you know, for me, everyone in the audience should know that South Florida has some of the finest police departments and police officers in the country. Miami-Dade Police is one of the best police departments in the country, one of the largest. Sometimes things happen. You know, I mentioned maybe there was a little bit lack of experience. That happens. You know, leadership matters. And if you have someone, and again, it's not to be critical of them, it's just that, you know, sometimes there's a little bit of a void when people leave, and new people need to learn, right, and adjust. But speaking in general, I mean, I feel very grateful to have the level of professionalism that we have in South Florida. I'm very proud of the City of Miami Police Department. They've done an incredible job. You know, Chief Morales doesn't talk about it a lot because he's a humble guy, but, you know, their crime rates are significantly lower than most major police departments across the country. And man, I personally feel very safe here in the hands of our local law enforcement. I think that's the biggest message. Sometimes things happen, but speaking in general, we got great cops. We got great chiefs.
And my apologies to you. I just called you Molina. Colina.
It's
Colina.
That's the combination of Morales and Colina right there.
We're
looking. I'm looking at him. He's looking at me. I'm like, hey.
We both pause. Is that me or
That's
you?
it. We're like.
Again, my humble apologies.
No, it's okay.
Chief Morales?
So I think we all recognize that major events and critical incidents are here to stay. Miami is one of America's playgrounds. We're one of the favorite tourist destinations. We are the gateway to the Americas. And we continue to get bigger and brighter, more vibrant. So I just want to let everyone out there that know that we work extremely hard to make sure that these incidents are far and few between. We learn from every mistake that we make in our profession collectively here in South Florida, and we're here to keep you safe, right? And if there's anything that we can do to help out, please let us know. We're here to serve you.
Thank you. And Chief Colina, I know that if they want to reach Chief Morales, they just contact the City of Miami, but if anyone that wants to reach out to you, where can they find you?
And you can Google the George Colina Group. And there's a website, there's contact information, phone number, email. It's all there, the George Colina Group.
Thank you, sir. David, any closing thoughts?
I think a lot of information has been circulated between us with a lot of great experience, good thoughts. I know we all want nothing but the best for law enforcement. And we take a great deal of pride in the job we do, or we have done. And there's no doubt, I think Chief Colina hit it on the head, and so did Chief Morales, that this is you got some really great law enforcement right here in South Florida, and we are blessed for that.
Absolutely. No shortage of threat where these young men and women are often putting their life at risk, their personal safety, putting it all at risk. Think about that next time anyone wants to complain about the police or second guess them. And I will say this, knowing these two gentlemen, I know that we police our own, and they police their agencies, as well as the law enforcement community. This has been another episode of Bets and Badges. If you wish to find us, you can find us on all local media, local podcast platforms, social media platforms under Bets and Badges, or join us on our website. New website just launched, a work in progress, betsandbadges.com. To the Millers, Miami Community News team, Rachel Brunch at our producer behind the scenes, the Miller brothers, we can't thank you enough, and to you, the audience, couldn't do it without you. Look forward to speaking to you next time. Thank you.